Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. For today's video, we're going to continue down that list of the 50 best horror movies that you've never seen, with number 27 for us, but number 30 on the list, Burnt Offerings. Burnt Offerings came out in 1976, and it was directed by Dan Curtis and written by Dan Curtis and William Nolan, but also based off of a novel that came out in 1973 by Robert Marasco. And as you know, I'm going to give you a quick synopsis of the film. It takes place in the beginning of summer, where we meet a family that is looking to move into this large 19th century mansion for the summer. Ben and his wife Marion have a 12-year-old son named Davy, and they're excited about the opportunity to move into this house for the summer, but they are wary because the owners are letting them move in for the entire summer for only $900. And this is a huge mansion, so they're obviously sort of skeptical on why the price is so low. And the owners of the house tell them they wouldn't have to take care of the house, it sort of will just take care of itself, and that the only thing that they'll need to do is take care of their elderly mother. They say she's in her 80s, although she could pass for being in her 60s, and she lives in her upstairs room. They say their mother is obsessed with privacy and really likes to be left alone and loves living in her home, so that is sort of the biggest catch for them, is that they do have to live with their elderly mother, but they say all you need to do is bring her 3 meals a day, just set them outside of her room, she'll grab the trays and eat whenever she feels like it and leave the empty trays out. And while Ben is sort of skeptical to this, Marion had already fallen in love with the home and thinks that this is a great deal for them and that $900 for the entire summer is great, and all they have to do is feed this person's elderly mother. Like, that's not that big of a deal. So the family ends up moving into the home. Along with the family of 3, Ben brings along his elderly Aunt Elizabeth, who used to be a painter. And the house seems to be affecting everyone a little bit differently. Marion especially is getting deeply affected by the home. She starts to sort of seclude herself from the family, spending a lot of time in the upstairs room outside of the elderly mother's room. And she even starts to begin wearing old Victorian garments that she finds inside the house. She becomes obsessed with this collection of photographs inside the house that shows people from different time periods. She seems to be less and less involved with her own family and becoming more and more involved with this family that lives in this house. Ben also is becoming affected by the house, getting washed over with just a wave of rage while in the pool with his son Davy. He actually almost ends up drowning Davy in the pool. Aunt Elizabeth is there to witness this, and she's yelling at Ben like, "What are you doing? Stop it, you're hurting him." And when Davy finally escapes his father, he is terrified. He has no idea why his dad did this, and the look on Ben's face shows such an animalistic person that he clearly was not being himself. And whenever Davy comes to his mother Marion about this, she seems sort of unconcerned that her husband almost drowned her son, and she quickly forgives Ben and sort of lets the whole thing go. So now Ben is also being affected by the house, having these just waves of rage where he attacks his own family. And as things start to unfold, Aunt Elizabeth ends up getting severely sick and dies inside of the house. But Marion, who has secluded herself so much and is so obsessed with being a part of this home, doesn't even go to the funeral. And as all of this happens, the house itself seems to just be getting repaired, but no one's doing the repairing. At one point, Davy skins his knee, and a plant that was previously dead suddenly starts to sprout new life. Or Ben cut his hand on a champagne bottle, and a light bulb that was broken suddenly works again. So these little things are starting to happen where the house itself is starting to be rejuvenated while the family starts to deteriorate. And especially after Aunt Elizabeth's death, they start to see a lot of major changes in the house. Particularly, Ben watches as the shingles on top of the house fall off and new ones form. So they're seeing that the more tragedy that happens inside the home, the more alive the home becomes. It starts to repair itself. Ben starts to suspect that something inside the house is terribly wrong, and he even accuses Marion of being a part of it, as she is one of those people who's been just hiding away inside the home. She's the one that feeds the elderly mother in the upstairs, and she's the one that seems to be the least concerned about everything that's going on. Although when Davy starts to be again attacked in the pool, but this time by the waves in the pool is like drowning him by itself, Ben is unable to save him as he's in a catatonic state, so Marion does come in and saves her son. So she's not totally engulfed in the spirit of the home, but it definitely took her a while to get there. And Ben finally convinces her. He says, "We're leaving. I'm leaving with or without you. I'm taking Davy and I'm getting out of here." Marion doesn't want to leave but agrees to go. But before they left, she said that she wants to leave her phone number with the elderly mother in case she needs something. So she goes upstairs to give her phone number, member. After a little while, Marion doesn't come back down, so Ben, kind of irritated and getting annoyed that she's prolonging this process of leaving, goes upstairs to look for her. And he goes inside the house, up the stairs, but can't find Marion. So he knocks on the elderly woman's door. He hasn't seen her, he never actually met her, he doesn't know what she looks like, but the door opens up, and he's mortified to see that it's actually Marion inside of the room. She's now in full Victorian garb. She looks like she's been aged. She's got white hair, and she's kind of taken over the role of the mother. And we don't see exactly what happens, but Ben gets thrown out of the upper attic window, falling on top of his car, which Davy is still inside of. His face goes through the windshield, and he's killed upon impact. Davy obviously is terrified that he just watched his father get thrown out of a window and die on the car. He runs out of the car screaming for help. And as he's running up towards the house to try to get help for his father, one of the chimneys on the house gets knocked loose and falls, crushing Davy. And the movie ends with the original owners of the house, the children of the mother who lives upstairs, returning to the property and just raving of how beautiful the grounds look, how nice the house looks now. And they're excited because they have the return of their mother. And before the end credits, we see a shot of all of the photographs that Marion was obsessed with, showing all the people who are part of this family, generations and generations of photos. And there are 3 new photographs sitting on this table, one of Davy, Ben, and Aunt Elizabeth. Now, this movie was based off a novel that came out in 1973 of the same name, but there are some pretty big differences between the novel and the movie. Before Dan Curtis was given the opportunity to direct this film, he had actually read the novel years prior and didn't like it. And you can actually find interviews with him saying that he thought whoever has to adapt this into a movie is going to have a tough time. Dan's 2 biggest concerns with the movie was the ending and that there wasn't really a good scare in between. He felt like it was kind of a slow story altogether. In the book, instead of Marion saving David from drowning in the pool, Ben does actually go in the water and tries to save him, but they both die in the process. And the movie sort of ends just like that. There's no real revelation with Marion as the returned mother or anything really of that sort. It sort of was an open-end ending, which Dan thought was just sort of weak and didn't really feel like it gave the story a good conclusion. Another added element from the movie that we don't see in the book is this really creepy chauffeur that appears throughout the film as one of Ben's visions. Now, I didn't mention the chauffeur in my synopsis because personally, I don't think it adds a lot to the story. It's just this super creepy chauffeur that shows up in like a super old hearse, and he's got blackout sunglasses and just smiles, and that's really it, and it scares the shit out of Ben. That's the reason Ben is so catatonic and is unable to save Davy when he's in the pool and Marion has to step in. That's like the only time the chauffeur really does any damage in the film. Most of the time it's just a vision that Ben sees and no one else does. Personally, I also think the chauffeur is like the creepiest thing about the movie. He's the most unsettling character that we see, even though he doesn't really do a whole lot. It's something about seeing a chauffeur with those dark sunglasses just smiling at you that really is super creepy. And that's something Dan had happen to him whenever he was a child. Unfortunately, his mother passed away when he was a kid, and at her funeral, he remembers looking out the window and seeing the chauffeur of the hearse laughing with one of his coworkers. And he remembers thinking how deeply disturbing that was, seeing the man who's going to drive his dead mother's body away, laughing at the car that would take her away. And that sort of always stuck with him of just how unsettling it is to see a smiling chauffeur, especially one that is meant to transport dead people. So that was something he wanted to add into the film to give it a little extra creep factor. And honestly, a lot of the reviews I read from people who had read the book and seen the movie do agree that it adds a little extra elements. Apparently the novel is a little bit lackluster in the suspense and kind of you can lose interest pretty quickly. So having that chauffeur added element in the movie does have some benefit, even though it doesn't necessarily help the story go along. And yeah, this movie is very quiet overall. It's very, very subtle in the scares and the suspense that you get. It's one of those movies that it's important to pay attention while you're watching it or else you'll sort of miss little things. And there's a lot of little things to look at as the house sort of rebuilds itself, the photographs that Marion is obsessed with. There are sort of hints and little things that you can see, especially after watching it again, that you may not have noticed in the first part, that gives a hint as to what's going on inside the home. Now, we don't actually get an explanation for what happens inside the house. It's all sort of up to speculation and just based on the series of events that we see happen. But the general idea is that the house revives itself based on the blood shed at it. When Davy cuts his knee, a plant starts to regrow. Ben cuts his hand, a light bulb fixes itself. Aunt Elizabeth dies, the whole roof gets redone. So the bigger and more sacrifice made, the quicker the house can kind of regenerate itself. And that's when we realize that all of those photographs that Marion has been looking at aren't just relatives from this family, like a long bloodline of people. It's the people who were brought to this home to be sacrificed to it. And Marion is one of the people most affected by the home. She's the one that is going to reprise the role of the mother. That's what they mean when they say their mother returned. They basically needed a host to be able to stay in that room and be the spirit of the house. So we don't know if the mother is connected to the house in any spiritual way, or really how all of this got started. We just know that this is the cycle this house goes through. And of course it's convenient enough that every death looks like an accident. Aunt Elizabeth was just elderly, got really sick, and passed away from her illness. Ben fell out of a window to his death, and then the chimney simply just fell on Davy as he was underneath of it. So it's really easy to write these things off as just accidental deaths, just sort of mishaps that happened there, so there's no suspicion aimed at those living at the house. And this is a movie that's not super well known. It cost $2 million to make the movie, but only gained $1.5 million in box office sales. So they were still about $500,000 short of making back what they spent on the film. It's gained a little bit more notoriety now that some years have gone by, and it genuinely has like a decent story behind it. The haunted house theme is something we've seen time and time again. It a little bit reminds me of like The Haunting of Hill House, where it's sort of the home that's doing the hurting. But we also don't fully know that because we don't get a full backstory on what happened at this house, or if it's the spirit of the mother or the house itself that causes the possessions to happen. We don't really know that. But it's still a fun, supernatural, scary house film. Of course, you always see the father affected first. I don't know why it's always the dad first and why the dad always tries to kill one of the kids, but that's always just usually how it goes, and that's what we see first with Ben trying to drown Davy. Which, possessed or not, the fact that Marion was just so like, "Aw, you almost drowned our son. That's okay, don't worry about it," blows my mind. Like, he was very distraught in bed, like, I can't believe I did that, like, I can't believe I almost hurt Davy, and she's like, "Stop worrying about it, he's fine, you're fine." I'm like, "No, you just almost drowned our son, get the fuck out of here." But, whatever. She was possessed by the house, so I'll blame it on that and not her just terrible mothering. And this is actually one of Stephen King's favorite horror movies. He does genuinely like the suspense and the story behind it. And coming from someone who's written just countless horror stories, there has to be something there then, right? If even Stephen King himself is like, this isn't half bad. And there are tons of other horror movies and stories where the house does the possessing or the house does something, or it's, you don't start acting weird till you get to that house. So this isn't a new concept at all, but it's definitely one that's a little bit more interesting, and I would love to have gotten a little bit more explanation on the backstory of what happened in that home. But the film we get is already a shortened version of what they originally planned on doing. The family originally is from New York, and they were going to show them in New York, talking about buying the house, going down and seeing the house, but Dan Curtis decided that was pretty boring and wouldn't be that interesting. It would waste 20 minutes of everyone's time in the beginning, and he decided to mix that all together and just start with them at the house, agreeing to rent there for the summer, which personally I think was a good idea. Sometimes it's good to have that backstory of the family, but in this case, you don't necessarily need it. Just leading in with them already talking to the family about wanting to rent the place, I think gave us just enough of a backstory for that family that we needed, because it wasn't really about the family as much as it was about the house. And this movie has the iconic Karen Black. She starred in the Trilogy of Terror, which is another movie I'm going to discuss. It's from the 50 Best Horror Movies list. She also is known for her role in House of a Thousand Corpses. She's done countless other projects. As you Google her, you'll know something that she's been in. But she also is in the movie Killer Fish, which came out in 1979. And if you haven't seen it, on Netflix there is a show called Mystery Science Theater 3000. It's based off of a show from the 90s. It's just a rework of it for the 2000s. And there was an episode of MST3K on Netflix where they review the movie Killer Fish. That's where I watched the movie for the first time. It's a hysterical film. I definitely recommend. But I think a big reason this this movie wasn't as popular as it could have been for that time was because it did come out in a time where supernatural films were very popular. The 70s were a big time to see sort of supernatural films coming out. As I've kind of talked about before, you usually see trends in horror movies, like the 80s are super big on the slashers, while the 70s were big on the supernatural, and it was towards the end of the 70s going into the 80s that they transitioned into more of the slasher realm. But The Omen and Carrie came out in 1976 as well, so that's already two really popular supernatural films this movie had to compete with. And then in 77 we saw the movie Audrey Rose, and in 79 we got the Amityville Horror. So this movie definitely could have had more potential, but it came out in a time where it was just being overshadowed by movies who were just simply doing it better. Doesn't mean that this is a bad movie, but just one that maybe had come out at a different time or had a little bit more people backing it. It could have been a little more popular and maybe actually made at least, broke even budget-wise. And as far as the gore rating goes for this film, I'm gonna have to give it a gorgeous rating simply because there isn't a lot of blood. We do see some with some of the attacks when Davy skins his knee, Ben cuts his hand, stuff like that, but it's not gore, it's more just subtle, simple cuts and bruises that you get to see. Really the coolest bloody scene we get is whenever Ben gets thrown out the window and hits the car and his face is all bloody and gross. But, that's like the last 2 minutes of the movie, so can't really base a whole rating on that. So, but it's one of those movies that doesn't need a lot of blood and gore. Some films, it simply is just not necessary, and this probably would have felt a lot cheesier had they tried to squeeze in unnecessary gore. But personally, I do think this is a movie that deserved its spot on the list. It's not super well known, and the story can be kind of slow in places. It's got good actors who deliver the dialogue in a really convincing way, so it's not cheesy dialogue, bad acting, along with sort of a not great storyline. Honestly, the most critiques I see are just that the storyline itself wasn't that great, not that the people performing weren't great or the dialogue wasn't great. So I would suggest that you guys go check it out if you haven't seen it. But if you have seen it, I want to know what you think. Do you think this movie deserves a spot on the list? You can let me know in the comments down below or head over to my Instagram, What a Horror. I'll be making a post about this video as well. But as always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to see new videos because I put out new videos every Friday. And until next time, stay spooky.